And then when the shooting stops, when the war is over, or when the conflict at least has calmed down, hopefully it's stopped, oftentimes landmines need to be removed. This is absolutely critical because they will be landmines in the farmers' fields, so they won't be able to grow food. They will be landmines that were laid on the way to schools, on the local paths and roads and such, where communities simply can't function. And that was the purpose of laying the landmines to begin with, to stop people moving between communities. That's the first thing that often has to be done. And we have countries today, like Cambodia, where this is still a major challenge. There were so many landmines laid that even today, years and years after the conflict, we still have major food insecurity and overall security issues in areas where landmines are everywhere. One of our worst scenarios is areas where situations where landmines have been laid in a very impromptu fashion by certain parties of the conflict, and there's no maps left. Or if you do have maps or ideas where the mines were laid, they're not dependable. And so many people put their lives at risk, actually, those in the mine removal areas. These are NGOs often that specialize in this work. Highly dangerous, of course. And they simply have to randomly look, because no one's ever sure where the landmines are until there's a tragedy. Infrastructure, of course, has to be rebuilt. That's roads and bridges and water systems. Housing has to be rebuilt. I was in southern Sudan recently, and it's just remarkable. I was visiting a school feeding program, and it was a group of children underneath a tree. Everything was bombed flat during the years and years of war in southern Sudan. It's now about to become an independent country, and we have situations where so little infrastructure has been left from the war. We have to start absolutely from scratch. Agricultural systems, food markets have to be restored. Communities have to be revitalized. Remember, they've gone through major psychological conflicts. There are major consequences that come out of these wars, where communities will feel very disheartened and demoralized. Part of that revitalization effort is to help communities on their terms again to return to a degree as soon as possible, a normal degree of normal life, of normal community life. And that can be very, very difficult. Part of the way of doing that, of course, is getting back to usual and normal routines, such as opening schools, getting children back into school, getting parents back to work. This is much easier said than actually done, and can take quite a while after. And then, of course, prevention and resolution. We always would want to start with these situations. I'm talking about conflicts that break out, and that oftentimes the prevention and diplomacy aspects have been tried perhaps, but didn't work. We always, of course, even once conflicts have broken out, once they have become serious and violent, to the point where the most food insecure are affected, the most vulnerable are affected in communities and countries, obviously the answer is diplomacy, always. And of course the UN is in a very good position, oftentimes as a neutral party in all these conflicts, to help. But oftentimes we have to keep in mind that may not be as effective as we would hope, because it takes all parties interested in having a resolution. And often that's a situation that you do not find. It is in someone's or some group's interest to absolutely have the conflict. They feel they have the upper hand, and they can win as they see it. And we can have all the diplomacy we want in the world, but unless the other parties are willing, it's not going to be, these efforts will not be successful. So we need to also have then conflict early warning systems that I've referred to earlier when I showed you the various conflict maps that we are always monitoring. The UN system again, and all of us involved in this type of work, always trying to monitor the situations as they develop, and the social and political and economic factors that might be affecting potential conflict in these countries. And this is again why we have been emphasizing food prices as being a key trigger. that could lead to increased conflict in many of these countries, in these communities living right on the edge. We need to understand the major groups involved in these emerging conflict situations. What are their claims? Which groups consider themselves then in these situations to be most vulnerable, and that those who will lose the most, those who will gain the most. There's an issue in Bolivia, for example, in terms of separatist conflict, that may well develop further. Overall, we're simply looking at contingency planning pre and then post-war. During the war itself, we will be engaged or we will not. There will be times where the fighting will be so fierce where we the international community on the humanitarian side simply will not have access. So that contingency planning will just also be for the prevention or pre-conflict aspect, and then during the conflict itself, we will be already engaging in a discussion as to what we will do after. International intervention when it's really needed. There are places like Rwanda where I know the Canadian General Romeo Dallaire, who was the commander of the UN troops, later said after the genocide that he could have had a soldier on a UN peacekeeper soldier on every corner in downtown Kigali at the time when the genocide first started, and he couldn't still not have stopped it. Again, if there is a determination among those perpetrators in these situations to fight and to conflict no matter what, they will do so. And there's often little that we on the international community side can really do about it. And lastly, another issue that I think is important to touch on is that conflict can affect everyone regardless of race. You've heard me speak earlier of the effects of the Irish famine in Ireland in the 1840s and 1850s. That was in Europe. There are many people today who based on the news that they will see on television, the newspaper articles that they read, some people get the idea, well, there's something about people in the poorest areas, people of color, they're Africans, they tend to have all this disruption and conflict and that type of thing. Even recently, though, we've had this kind of ethnic cleansing that I've just referred to in Rwanda, in former Yugoslavia, in Eastern Europe. Conflict between three main ethnic groups, right? For you and I looking at these people, they would look exactly the same, but it was a religious issue, economic issue to an extent, between different groups in these countries, and there was then genocide committed by one group against another. This can happen anywhere in the world where conflicts can get out of hand and where communities can find reasons that they need to fight among themselves. It can happen anywhere, at any time.